At the end of the last video, I said I was going to take the transmission out of my car and try to make it work better. I realize not everybody watches all my videos, and the people that even do watch all my videos, the majority of the time, they might not watch the entire video. So, quick refresher. That transmission was in a Rambler we had that has a 400 small block, a straight axle, and a S10 rear end. It was a transmission that stuck together way before I was born as something that he could sell, and then never sold it, and it ended up, we used it. Well, the transmission that started out in the 70s, when we first got that car on the road, me and him put that thing together. It never did shift right. So about January, I took the one from the Rambler and the one from the 70 and put the main shaft out of the one in the Rambler in the 70s transmission. And it's still in here under my workbench. It's never been ran. The one that was in my car, was the one that was in the Rambler. The case, tail housing, that stuff, with a different output shaft, main shaft, whatever you want to call it, with the gears off the first, second, and third, and synchronizers out of the one that didn't shift right. I changed the synchronizers back when I done that, and took a little tiny cutoff wheel on a Dremel and smoothed the engagement teeth on the slider and the gears. And on the bench, it shifts okay. It wouldn't even do that before. Okay, when I put that transmission together, back in that video, which I believe I named Scrap Pile Muncie 2, I said in that video that transmission was supposed to be a backup for my car in case the Turbo 400 ever went out. It wasn't supposed to be a permanent thing. Actually, it was supposed to just be literally a backup. Now, back when I was painting that car, I changed my mind. I wanted a Muncie in the car. I didn't want the automatic in it. So, the transmission that was supposed to be a backup was suddenly the transmission that I put in the car. First is fine. All the gears are really, they're not that loud. They make a little noise, but that's not the problem. It still does not shift in second or third. It won't downshift in the second, and it won't upshift in the third. In order to get it in second, if you're needing to downshift it, you have to go toward first and then into the second. To get it to go in the third, upshifting, you have to go to fourth and then third. That is annoying. It just does it. And that's the same thing that when those gears and stuff were in Dad's other transmission, that's the exact same thing that it did. Only in his car it was worse. I did help it by shaving that stuff off. But what it had done is if you've ever been in a Muncie or any transmission, or you've ever looked at one, the engagement teeth on the gears, if you have a clutch issue or something has been shifted really hard, a lot, it'll round the gears off. It'll round the little teeth off, and then the slider don't want to go on it. It doesn't really act like that. But that's the only thing that I could ever find. It does not scrape. It just don't go into gear. So, I am eventually going to go back into that transmission. I'm going to change second and third and the entire synchronizer assemblies. Everything. Just to try to get that one where it'll shift. And it'll still have noise, I'm sure. It'll still have a cluster gear that had the beginning of ridges in it. But it should work. And that can be what it was supposed to be. My backup. Alright. Now since that's out of the way. This one here, if you go back and watch my videos, is the one known as scrap pile. It's the one that was in Dad's car when he done that burnout video. It's the one that I took out to put in the one I had new gears in. It was working fine. You get to see me dig through boxes of junk parts and build a working wide ratio muncie 4-speed. I'm in here looking for a cluster gear. Somebody made a exhaust cutout out of pieces of cast iron. Wide ratios. I feel like I'm about to fall through this floor. Alright, so I don't know what I'm going to do to get the rest off of them. Off the outside I'm not that worried about, but the inside where the bearings run, they're pretty rusty too. So it may not look like it, but that gear's a lot cleaner than it was. I took it to a friend of mine's shop, and he has a shop blast cabinet. All the teeth are good on that gear. The main problem I'm a little concerned about is down in here. Called surface rust. A lot of surface rust. But I'm of the belief that low spots don't hurt anything. It's the high spots. So I want to clean the inside of that out. But right now, I'm also removing the anti-rattle, the backlash plate, whatever you want to call it, because I'm sure there's steel shot and it's rusted pretty thin in a couple places. I want to plug up this bench grinder with a wire brush here and clean up that gear. I'll show you what it looks like here in a second. Alright. I don't really have to, honestly. I could just leave the outside of it alone now. But I want to go back with a drill and a smaller wire brush and get the rest of the rust out of the teeth. But I've helped it a lot. And probably the hardest part of this was getting those pins out of the gear that held the rattle plate on it, because one came out easy and the other two I had to drill because they were rusted in. But the next thing I want to focus on is taking a coat hanger or dowel pin or something and wrapping sanding paper, probably a 400, and taking this and going up and down it until that's 90%. Coat hanger, a piece of Scotch-Brite. Not removing a lot, but it is smooth. I might step up to a piece of 400 grit. Alright, so there's still slight pitting, but you don't feel any of that. And I believe that's as good as that gets. Alright. I've got it as clean as it's going to be. Found a good bunch of good stuff here. There's at least 2 different transmissions worth of needle bearings in here. There's a 7/8 pin needle and a 1-inch pin needle. There was 1, 2, 3 wrenches. This snap ring pair of pliers. I hate bees. But all these little bearings goes in one of those cluster gears along with this pin. I hope that sleeve's the right kind. Broken snap rings inside that can's broken gears and all kinds of fun stuff. One on the bottom is a 7/8 needle bearing, and that one's 1-inch. And put them in that gear. I'll go through them again before I do that and make sure there's at least enough to do it. I'll pick out the best ones and clean them. There's extra stuff in here. I'll be back in a few after I've gotten those bearings cleaned up, and I may be using that case and that pin and gear and going ahead and putting the cluster gear in the case. So I cleaned up the bearings as I went, took grease and packed the gear, then put the tube, roll needles, washer, roll needles, washer. That was a solid tube, so it didn't use the washer at the tube. Test fit the shaft. I've taken it out to look at it. I want to put it back in. Turns good. So I put the cluster gear in the case. Drove the pin in. I think that's lined up. If it ain't, I'll turn it. You want to see how you get a transmission main shaft apart without a press and it's rested solid? So I got a main shaft apart, reverse, and speedometer gear, first gear sleeve, first gear, second gear, third gear, input. I got a couple hubs to choose from. The two clean ones were on that shaft. One of these was a late model and the other one was early. But it tells me that at one time Dad had put this gear, this main shaft together, but you know, it rusted so much and shit that I didn't want to use it. I want to use the input pilot bearings or whatever out of this one and main bearing. And I gotta find reverse in another transmission. I didn't show putting the main shaft back together and putting the transmission 90% together, but I figured I could go ahead and show you what it looks like. I cleaned, even though it don't look like it or sound like it really, I cleaned all the gears up the best I could with a wire brush and some sandpaper. I set everything as good as I could with little knowledge of how this is supposed to be. But the 1 and 2 synchronizer assembly is a early synchronizer. It's got the thin rings. And 3 and 4 is late model. You know, the fat rings. I used the best synchronizers I could find. It's got new gaskets here and here. It's going to have a new gasket here and a new gasket for the bearing retainer. I don't have one, so I'm probably either going to get a used bearing retainer or buy a $17, $20 one on eBay. I can show you that reverse works. See how the sliders are turning backwards. The best I could do with the junk I had without buying new parts. About a year and a half ago, I put together a muncie up here and called it the scrap pile muncie. Well, that's this one. We've been running that in that 70 this entire time. And that was probably 1,500 gentle miles. Yeah. But if you remember, I had a bunch of people telling me that those gears are too rough. So even though it was made out of complete junk, it works fine. You can see where it runs on those gears. I mean, just look at the pitting on them. That's just extra space to hold grease. See the patterns? All the patterns are great on it. You do not have to have perfect parts in order for something to work. That transmission, if it tore out the next time I drive it, that would be fine, because I never expected it to last this long. The only thing wrong with this transmission to keep me from putting it right back in mine without doing anything to it, I don't have a speedometer gear on the main shaft, and it leaks oil. Bearings are fine, it shifts great, everything's fine on it. So Dad's really happy with the one I've got in his car now. This one shifts as good as all of them does. Really better than most of the ones I've driven. But the one that's in his car, he likes the most. It's quiet. It doesn't make any whines. I mean, it's like it should be. That transmission that's in that car is like they used to be when they weren't wore out. So, his car gets to keep the transmission with the new gears until something happens to it. I'm running scrap pile in mine. I'm going to take it apart, clean it, put new gaskets back in it, a speedometer gear back in it, and a rear seal. And I'm going to show you some of that. I'm not taking the gears off the main shaft. I'm not messing with any of that because it works. I'm just taking it back apart far enough to clean some of the mud out of it. Trying to keep it from pulling all the way apart at once. In case you ain't watched a lot of my videos, I use a lot of stuff over that you really probably shouldn't. Yep, I should be in neutral. I can't believe I just done that.